Good evening. This is 2020 Church, and I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez. You know, we're here at this time of the year, and 4 years past our last election time, and so we're moving into saying yes to the current administration. We like what you've done, you're still hired, or we don't like what you've done, you're fired. It's that whole time of the year. I was watching a little bit of TV this morning, and it just gets old looking at all of the candidates and their messages on both sides, looking at primarily two parties who are here at the end vying for a place at the White House. And it's hard to know what's right because we've learned to just listen to little bites which aren't giving you the truth. They're just giving you what they want you to hear.
Think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
They're eating the dogs.
A little bite of something here, a little snippet of something there. So it's hard to know who to vote for or what to vote for in regards to propositions. But before we talk a little bit more about that, let me say that the whole of the Bible is written really in this, if I can say it this way, in this cloud of politic, in this cloud of running governments and policies. In other words, the structure by which we run our governments, or how we run a government, or how we run an entity of people. That's really what we would call polity or policies. That structure, which sometimes we call the art of or the science of running a people through a government. And so the Bible is surrounded with polity. It's a part of all of the Old Testament by the very nature that Israel itself was, in fact, not just a religious institution, but a political one. And so without getting into all of that, which is complicated yet simple, it was run essentially by a God who called a people to himself and was going to guide them and minister to them through the various tribes, and in particular, the religious tribe of the Levites, and consequently the priests. And we can go on and on with that, but again, just in just a short form, the Old Testament was primarily run through that until they wanted a king, and then a king was instituted, and that became the political system around so much of what we can read about in the Old Testament regarding laws and the civility of living together, the morality of life and citizenry within Israel. And then when we come to the New Testament, we have a change in that, because we find that politics still existed in Israel, but in a much more condensed and small way, because it was within a bigger polity. It was within and surrounded by, umbrellaed by, if I could say this, clouded in the Roman government. And again, we can look at Rome as a political entity and the Jewish political entity and that struggle, which ultimately we come to, we're moving now quickly, to the end of the life of Jesus, where he's ultimately killed by a religious political system and a state political system. That between Rome and the robed of Israel, we have the crucifixion of Christ. And then we have the New Testament after the gospel story, after the resurrection of Jesus. We have the birth of the church within a political system. And still, fighting the internal system of a political Israel. This is the Bible. So to say that there isn't politics in the Bible is naive. To say that there aren't politics in the Bible is having little understanding of what the Bible contextually says to us. Now, again, the Bible isn't giving us a political manuscript. I'm just saying that it's all clouded within the reality of humans existing, needing to be governed by itself in order to live a life that makes sense, that has order. And in fact, it's order out of chaos as to why God gives us government. So we're told in Romans to understand that the authorities given to man, the very idea of government, is from God. It doesn't mean that all governments are moral or good, but that the structure and the need and the reality of them is a God creation. And so we're told to obey the authorities that God allows to be in power, and to respect them, and to pray for them, to pray for our leaders, whether you like the current administration or not, to pray for our leaders. Now, I'm not hiding or pretending that I like our current administration. I don't like our current administration. I don't know Joe Biden. I don't know Kamala Harris, but I by and large, for the most part, really, really, really dislike their policies. Those things that they've put in order to govern us. They like big government. I think government's too big. And when government gets too big, our freedoms get too small. I really, really don't like their social agendas, their economic agendas. I don't like their foreign affairs agenda. I don't like their national security agendas. I don't like their political platform. It used to be that let's vote for somebody who has, a moral footing, and let's vote and put into office moral people. What we mean by that as Christians is those who hold a Judeo-Christian moral upbringing, or rather mooring. But frankly, in today's world, it's hard to find, and I'm sure they're there, I worked for one, moral politicians. Briefly, my background, if you're not aware of it, of course, I'm a pastor and a Christian at that, but certainly a pastor and equipped not just by living for Jesus, but being also educated as somebody who can teach the Bible. And I'm not saying you need that, but I have that. And after seminary, and I was ordained to be a minister of the gospel. The gospel is the heart of my life, as that is what Jesus has given me to preach. But in my journey of life as a Christian, I've had an opportunity to lead a YMCA, which is very political, and working in a political structure while I pastored a church full time. I was a chaplain for 28 years in a police department that by its very nature is a political system within a political system. There's policy all over it. And then also, I specifically worked for a politician, a man I loved, a man I still love and have a relationship with as a fellow pastor, but in that I was able to serve as the chief of staff for some time and understand politics even more so. But not saying I'm an expert, but that I have knowledge that policy is what we're revolved in part of. And that Christians must understand that. And not voting is hogwash. Because then we ignore the fact that God says to be accountable to those who are in authority over us, or rather to honor them. And part of honoring them is realizing that our form of government is that it's by the people, we the people. So that we and I is that we are mandated to vote as being responsible citizens of a democratic republic. I'm not here to give you a political lesson on what that all means, but only that in this little segment that we are called to be voting Christians because that's our responsibility before the Lord as those who are citizens of this country he's put us in. And we're called to honor that, I believe, as citizens. There are some who say, well, we have two candidates that we really don't like, so guess what? I'm not voting for either one of them, and I'm going to vote for nobody or for somebody else that doesn't matter. And I say again, hogwash. That is just cowardly to me. Because the fact of the matter is, you will like one more than the other. I should say that there is one better suited than the other to run this country in a way in which I would call is more akin to a biblical worldview. They don't need to be moral people, but their policies, how akin are they to a biblical worldview? So you would like to take like this, in this case, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, and the Biden administration, because they've already been there for some time. They've shown what they are. And to say, okay, let's now take their foreign policy and you need to decide 1 through 5, give each one a vote. Which one is a better policy? Take their national security. Which one is a better policy? Take their social agenda regarding gender and racial issues and the abortion issue, and which one has a better policy? Which one more fits the biblical worldview? And so, though we may not be able to find one that is more or less moral than the other, which one best fits a biblical worldview, then it comes into play, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, and thy will be done. I'm not trying to stretch that very, if I can say this in a good way, that very fat passage, that very fat scripture that Jesus says, pray like this. But if we want to say, Lord, your will be done, Lord, your kingdom come, then we want to have as best we can kingdom-like policies. And you're going to say, oh yeah, well, we don't have, no, we have some that are better than others. All of them very imperfect, run by imperfect people. And even if somebody is moral now, they may not be tomorrow. But which ones better reflect going forward a biblical worldview that's better for your children? Now you need to make that decision. I made my decision. You need to make it. Now, that said, I'd like to say that in Jeremiah it says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Jeremiah 29:7. What I'm going to say is this, is that we have been led into this country or birthed here. We need to pray for it and then enact what's been given to us by our Constitution, that is to vote for it. You might say, well, your vote doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. Even if it's the Electoral College that seems to not really count your vote the way you'd like it to. Or it may be that you're not in a state that's going to swing towards that candidate that you would vote for one way or another. I would say, but it matters, because popular votes matter. They matter in the long run. And again, I won't go into all of that, but that your vote matters. And ultimately, I think it matters that we're responsible before the Lord. And then I want to read to you out of, again, this passage. Hang on, let me find it here. The Romans 13 passage. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. So we want to pray for our country and for those who serve us or who are called to serve us. By the way, there are many people in government. They've been in government their whole lives, and they're millionaires multi-times by just being our servants. That's always a little skewed to me. But that said, the one who's in authority is there for our good. At least that is God's intent. And so we are called to vote them in or out, or to be conscious of the fact that we're responsible before God to care for those who govern over us. And in our country, to vote those in or out as much as we can. And again, it's worse, if I can say it this way. If there's a best and the worst, that the worst may be I did nothing, no, I didn't even vote. That's worse than my vote didn't seem to matter a whole bunch, but I voted. I did what was afforded me to do. And I did the best I could to vote for those things that I thought, or for that person who I thought was going to best enact godly type or kind of principles. And I hope that you do the same thing. Now, let me take a little quick sidebar. You know, this might be hard to listen to because political things can be boring. And I think it's a hard issue for us. I think political things can be exciting. We can be so caught up in it to believe that somehow the political system, however it goes, right or left, that is our saving grace. I don't believe that for a minute. But I do believe in trying to create better cultures by just being strong Christians, responsible Christians, so that for as long as I can perpetuate a country that is kind to my grandkids. And so I hope that you can do the same. To vote in such a way that you want to create a country as best you can, as much power as God has given you, to be kind to your grandkids. And for those of you who are younger than me, to your kids. Now here's the thing that's more specific to us as believers. I'm going to go over just a few of some of California's propositions. I didn't look at it closely enough, but I'm told that the Rose Institute at Claremont McKenna College is a very conservative but thoughtful think tank, and they have very good policies, and they have a voter's guide, and they explain just with clarity what each proposition is saying, and they're giving the freedom. You're voted. They're not commenting on it as I would. They're just giving you, here's what you're voting for. Here's what you get if you vote for it. Here's what you get if you don't vote for it. But I briefly want to go over a couple propositions. One of them is Proposition 3. The purpose of this measure would remove language from the California Constitution specifying that marriage is only between a man and a woman, and officially recognize a fundamental state constitutional right to marry regardless of spousal gender. Well, let me give you a little background to this. In March 2000, California voters passed Proposition 22, an initiative statute declaring that only marriage between a man and a woman be recognized in California, and thereby banning same-sex marriage in the state. Well, in May of 2008, however, the California Supreme Court struck down Proposition 22 on the grounds that it violated rights guaranteed by the California Constitution. Opponents of same-sex marriage responded by qualifying Proposition 8 for the November ballot, which enshrined the ban on same-sex marriage in the state's constitution. California voters passed Proposition 8 in November 2008, with 52% of voters supporting the measure. In 2010, a federal district court in California ruled that Proposition 8 violated the due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And after the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, that's a clue, of the Ninth Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the district court opinion to stand, same-sex marriages began in California in June 2013. And in 2015, same-sex marriage became legal throughout the nation when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Oberfeld versus Hodges that under the U.S. constitutionally guaranteed right to marry, blah, blah, blah. Here's my point on that. Is that the people voted that same-sex marriage was not the way to go. But only marriage between a man and a woman would be what would be good for our culture, for our society, for our people. But it was the courts, the liberal courts and judges that broke that down. It wasn't the people, it was the government. We don't have to agree with that. In fact, we don't, but we honor that decision that was made, though we don't agree with it. Now, this particular proposition, Proposition 3, is wanting to, again, change the wording in our Constitution regarding same-sex marriage as being equal to all other marriages. And I say, no, leave it the same, even though it doesn't really change anything legally. It's one more little thing that just makes it all wrong. But it's the one thing that we can hang on to still, that it says it right here in our Constitution, that marriage is between a man and a woman. I would encourage you to vote no on 3. So Proposition 3, I jumped ahead because that was like in my crawl. So just because of how the government stepped in and took that whole thing over regarding same-sex marriage. But I want to jump back to what should have been the first one, which is Proposition 2. And Proposition 2 is the educational system the state borrowing $10 billion to modernize our educational classrooms and systems, including even buying land. And I would say that we already are well over $100 billion in debt, and we want to add another $10 billion on top of that for a state that has already misspent money towards education. That there are better things that we could do to increase a better learning environment for our children, and it isn't sinking more money into our current educational system, which is very poor. We have an educational system, K through 12, that ranks low, though we are one of the highest budgeted programs in the country. I think only New York and Texas, maybe Florida, but are on our scale. Our budget is greater than a number of states put together. And we have so misappropriated money that putting more money into this, to me, is nutty. We have a very liberal educational system that, again, will take these funds and even misappropriate them so that already well-funded schools will get more than they should and less funded schools will get less than they should. And I don't trust any of that system. So anytime, and by the way, anytime that a bond goes through, it's got to be matched by local funds. So that means that they can come after you by increasing property taxes, because they have to match those funds. And so local residents will be paying. It's just how it goes. And so I would say any bond, no, especially towards education. Proposition 4, the purpose of that proposition is Safe Drinking Water, Wildfire Prevention, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act of 2024 is to authorize $10 billion in bonds to finance various natural resources, environmental, and climate risk reduction projects. And I would say, again, when it comes to money and allocating that to our current bureaucratic system, I say no. I say find another way. Take money that's into the pet projects and put it somewhere else. Find something else. We are so overtaxed that I just want to stay away from adding more money to do more things to make government bigger. This creates bigger, again, bureaucracy as well. Proposition 5 amends the California Constitution to lower the voting threshold for local governments to borrow money for affordable housing and public infrastructure. The purpose of Proposition 5 would amend California's Constitution to lower the voting threshold from 2/3 to 55% for local governments to sell bonds to raise money for affordable housing and public infrastructure, such as roads, water projects, and fire protection. And I would say from the state level, I would say no. It's asking for more money. I would say those are local. If we're looking at local infrastructure, those are local issues. I just think that we're increasing debt upon debt upon debt. Proposition 6 prohibits the forced labor of persons incarcerated in California's prisons and county jails. The purpose of Proposition 6 is to amend the California Constitution to end involuntary servitude as a punishment for those convicted of crimes and serving time in state prison or county jail. It's another way, they use the word slavery. We want to end all slavery. But I would say absolutely not. When you're incarcerated, you're not a slave, you're incarcerated. And to use the verbiage, we don't believe in slavery, not even for those who are in prison, is ludicrous. It's just using language to get you emotionally voting their way. But they're incarcerated, and we find purpose and meaning in doing things that are work-related. So creating workforces where they're doing something, to me, is healthy. And saying, no, they don't have to do anything, it's not our job to, request this of them, is to me ludicrous. So I would say no on 6. Proposition 32 increases California's minimum wage to $18 per hour, then adjusted annually for inflation. Again, I say no. I just think it's inappropriate. It just makes the government more in charge of how much we earn. It's just government getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So, again, no. When it comes to government getting involved with rents, with how we run business, I say, at this level anyway, I say no. Well, I think that's all I'll address. If you have any questions and you're part of this church, feel free to call me or other pastors in this church, and hopefully they'll have an answer for you. Let me end with this. Vote. Voting is not only a constitutional right, I think it's a Christian responsibility. And again, don't be lazy. There's a lot of voices. But it's not that hard to look at the platform, the political platform for one person to compare to the political platform of another person. Just facts. And go rate them, which is the best one. Don't waste your vote on what doesn't matter, because one matters more than the other. At least that's my opinion. So may you prayerfully vote. And as we are faithful to pray, that doesn't guarantee, prayer doesn't guarantee that God's going to do what I've prayed for. So if another king, so to speak, or president is in power that isn't one that you'd want in power, your command by the Lord is to continue to pray for them. And who knows? People are changed all the time, and our salvation will not come through the political system. But I want to encourage you to pray in such a way that you're helping to bring in to this country and administration that's going to make a land that's better for your children and grandchildren. My opinion, for me, it's the Trump and the Vance ticket, because their platform is much more given to biblical principles than the current administration, which is extremely abortion heavy, and it's gender heavy, it's racially heavy, it's open border heavy, it's same-sex marriage heavy. That whole agenda has taken hold of that administration. So those things alone just make me go, nah, not good. But you vote before God, like I vote before God. Well, God bless you. Thanks for hanging in. This isn't always easy when we're talking about issues, current issues that are politically connected, but it's important for us to hear it, to think about it. Hope that you think about it. Well, God bless you. Go in peace. Hope to see you this Sunday.